Leka Devatha from Rehab at Homes. I started my company back in 2014 and have dabbled in many things real estate. I've done over 40 single family flips, land deals, 1031 exchanges, and recently even some out of state investing, which is not daunting at all. So reach out to me if you want to talk about any of those things. I'd be happy to walk you through my process and just help you out in any way I can. This event is brought to you by Real Estate at Work. It's a local meetup that I co-host with Nee Lee and Albert Bowie. Hopefully in the near future, we'll see you in person. But until then, congratulations for surviving another week. It's the middle of May. We've been at this for almost 2 months. And for those of us in Washington State, we're almost at phase 2. This is great for one thing, like all real estate activities can resume, but also I can get my nails done, my hair done, like, come on already. But on a serious note, I hope everyone's staying safe and staying healthy. And I'm just excited that we can bring you all these awesome speakers and get together like a couple times a month. So I posed this question earlier, but if you're a landlord or a property manager, tell us in the chat box how many doors you own or manage. We'd love to see. I am really looking forward to learning from our speakers today. They have each owned and operated large rental portfolios for years and have done so very successfully. Unfortunately, one of our speakers, BB French, won't be able to join us today. She is sadly driving to Oregon to take care of a family emergency, but I would highly encourage getting to know her and hopefully we'll bring her back out soon. She currently manages 400 units and she is just an OG property manager and she's super systems driven, which helps her get a lot of work done. So get to know BB and hopefully you'll see her back here soon. So let me introduce you to Preston and William. Preston is the founder and CEO of Walls Property Group and Walls Property Management. He currently manages a portfolio of 85 plus buildings, all in the core downtown Seattle neighborhoods between Cap Hill and Ballard, like between that short area. He manages almost 800 units. Preston is also in the middle of a bunch of construction projects, and you have to ask him about that because none of them are straightforward. He is also an expert at creating investment opportunities through syndication of multifamily real estate. He has also served as a project manager for dozens of building renovations. Most importantly, and this goes for William as well, they both have such an opportunity mindset and are so willing and ready to share their knowledge and expertise. It's not often that you come across people with so much experience in this field. And I've often joked with Preston that I want to grow up to be just like him, although he's not even that much older than me. So our next speaker I'm going to introduce to you is William Shadbolt. William first purchased his rental property in '93. And since 2010, he has been purchasing REOs, rehabbing them and renting them out. His focus is South Seattle and Renton. He also does own a few properties in North Seattle. In addition to this, he owns self-storage units, single-family rentals, and mobile home parks outside Washington State. William is an active member of the Rental Housing Association of Washington, and he's also on the board of the Housing Connector. He is also a real estate broker, among many other things. So just to give you a format of the webinar, we're going to go through each of their presentations, and then we'll have time for Q&A. Again, go ahead and type in your questions in the Q&A box. And for this one, I hope you brought pen and paper. These guys are going to throw out a lot of information at you today. So let's get started. Preston, how about we get started with you?
Sounds great, Leka. Thank you. Thank you for the intro. I'm excited to be here, though I'm disappointed that BB couldn't make it. I was looking forward to seeing her and to going after her in the order so I I don't know, embarrass her a little bit. With,
Well, you should tell the audience how you know her.
So she and I go way back to before she was involved in real estate. She, like so many people, was in a non-real estate job that she was good at and well qualified for, but it wasn't the right fit for her, and she was frustrated, and I could see that fire in her that could turn into something else. And ultimately she wasn't the right fit for the role that I was hiring for at the time, but we continued on, we continued in touch, and I continued to mentor her and just guide and see her progress along the way. And she's just had this meteoric career and rise, and just she's
Killed it.
She's a hustler and has done a really, really great job for herself. So I'm proud of everything she's been able to accomplish. Yeah. And I part of it is I recognize and I value it in her, because I mean that was my start in real estate. I started with a little triplex on Queen Anne and turned it into a 4-unit building. I lived there. I house hacked it, and then you refinance it, and that turned into a down payment on a 6-unit building in Magnolia, and it just like keeps snowballing from there. And now that it's turned into to a good portfolio and built a business around it.
And so, Preston, what year did you get started?
I bought my first building in 2003, which was a year after I moved back to Seattle. I went to school on the East Coast, and I thought I was gonna work on Wall Street. I did it for 4 years. I got burnt out, and it was time to move back. So. Yeah. That was man, yeah, a little while back, and just it's been fun growing the pace. For the first 5 or 6 years, my goal was to do one project a year, and it just kind of grew and evolved from there.
That's amazing.
So I wanted to focus today on what I've seen rental wise, and just impacts the market since COVID. It's it seems to be on everyone's mind, and I've collected a couple months of data now on collections, on leasing, on maintenance. So if we're ready to get started on some slides, I will get going on that. Let me just share my screen here. All right. Can you see that all right, Leka?
Yes.
Okay.
Perfect.
Good. So the delinquency has been the big headline grabber in all of this, right? When this started, the narrative was the sky's falling, people aren't going to pay their rent. We need to put all these protections in place for people that haven't been able to that have lost their job and will not be able to pay rent. But the data has not played out this way at all. These numbers are essentially in line with the March collection data, and has the collections have been really strong. This does exclude our commercial tenants, so the retail part of part of a mixed use building, for example. So just focus on residential, and clearly there's higher delinquency on the commercial side. But from a residential standpoint, delinquency is holding up pretty well. And it's also been interesting where that delinquency is coming from. So a very, very direct correlation between building quality, credit quality of the residents, and their likelihood to pay or be able to stay current. And this gets me thinking, from a strategic standpoint, how do you what's the takeaway from this, or how do you position for the future? There's, for assets that you own, there's some things that are within your control, but this slide should be a reminder or a helpful nudge to try to improve the quality of your building, wherever, in whatever ways possible, to move it from a B- to a B through some renovations, through some selective upgrades to help mitigate your impacts, delinquencies, credit loss in the future. On the leasing front, as you would expect, the leasing inquiries are down, as fewer people want to get out and be out shopping. But the upside to that is the conversion rate, or the serious shoppers have displaced the tire kickers out there. So there's more urgency, or people that are out looking for apartments. They're really looking for apartments, and that's helped the conversion. So this graph is on the maintenance work orders, and what we have tried, if this had never come up, maintenance in terms of interior work orders in units, those have gone down significantly since all of this started. There's mutual risk and concern about being in someone's space, and so a lot of those work orders just have been deferred. So one we've started going around this is through virtual work orders, and essentially doing a Zoom call with a resident and diagnosing and fixing things that come up. Things like garbage disposals are big ones, electrical troubleshooting. We've had a number of freezers that weren't staying cold because refrigerators are jam-packed with food now, and so the air circulation's not getting from the refrigerator to the freezer. So things like that have been kind of recurring maintenance work orders. But virtual work orders is one. On the leasing side, we've started a 90-day risk-free trial, meaning a resident can break their lease without a lease break fee 90 days into that lease. If they lose their job, if they have to go care for someone, and this has helped out our leasing, especially when people can't get inside or don't want to tour property. They're relying on pictures of virtual tours to get familiar and comfortable with signing that lease. Another program we did is a resident work program. We offered residents in buildings that had lost their job or had more times on their hands to do projects, cleaning, painting, pressure washing around buildings for rent credit. What are we doing on day to day? We've had some PPE making parties or seminars. Supplies are low, so we've been making our own, especially for the maintenance and leasing teams. And in terms of challenges, just navigating all of the changes and getting through it quickly and digesting those and putting them in place, moving things in another direction quickly has probably been the hardest thing, and that seems to be stabilizing some. The pace of change has been quite a bit less. In terms of delinquency, we early on in this, we got a lot of feedback from residents worried that they wouldn't be able to pay rent. So we put together a lot of resources for residents, how to what protections they have in place, ways they can stay current, options, and all of our goal was oriented around pushing out the possibility of payment plans as long as possible, because our experience has been payment plans, while great in theory, can dig a pretty deep hole quickly if they don't stay current. And a lot of that's around increased communication. So internally, we've ramped up communication. We have a weekly all company check-in. Our leadership team meets daily to share a quick take on what's going on, and we've been highlighting two employees per week at the all company meeting to share just their personal take on how they're navigating this and how they're getting through. We've also increased the frequency of our employee shout outs. So essentially, employee of the week has become employee of the day, just to get more communication, recognition for people when we're not in as close a contact, and we lose that water cooler chatter that's out there. So yes, Leka, I'll send it back to you. That's the bulk of what I wanted to get through, and I know there's a few questions that you'd had out there. I'm happy to take them now or wait till the end.
No, we can. I have a few questions for you that I collected from some of our audience. So let's just go through those. I see a lot of new people join us. So welcome to the ones that just are starting to join us. Preston, that was great. I love how you are motivating your team. And, for those of you that don't know, Preston's team's actually managing one of my properties in Seattle, and they've been amazing at it's been pretty difficult to lease it out in these times, but they've been so on top of it, and it's been amazing. So I want to thank you for that, Preston. It's great that you're doing so much with the team, and everybody's staying motivated. That's huge.
You bet. It's fun to see the traffic reports for your building and keep cheering for one to get signed soon.
I know, yay. Okay, so you mentioned delinquency rates. How do you predict these rates to change over the next year or so?
Yeah. So my take on the delinquency rate is the reason it didn't get as bad as everyone predicted it would be is there's so much stimulus money out there. There's so much helicopter money coming in. I suspect these delinquency rates will stay unchanged as long as the $600 federal stimulus for unemployment checks continue to go out. As long as the government is pumping money into the system for people that have lost their jobs. I mean, I just anecdotally have heard from several people that they're making more money on unemployment than they were as a server, barista, whatever they were doing previously. And you know,
Yeah.
when you have that floor in the labor market through unemployment benefits, you don't have a lot of hardship. So I see it. I see it holding up as long as the government stays in place.
Okay, awesome. What's been the best communication strategy for your residents and third-party property owners?
So putting together a resource page that's a consolidated page of all the things that are relevant to changing landlord-tenant laws, unemployment benefits, just all in one place. Even if they don't read it or use it, it communicates the message that this is there for them, and we put it together for them, and it's created a lot of goodwill, camaraderie, and just we're working together through this. I mean, so much of the Kashama Sawant narrative is, you know, we've got to have this adversarial relationship, and that's what we need to fight against, and to just be able to see a different conversation take place between a management company and residents of the properties has been really good to see.
That's amazing. I'm so glad you said that. That is, you know, we definitely have to deal with a lot in Seattle, in the core Seattle market. And so it's good to see, you know, large property management companies like you wanting to kind of even the playing field a little bit. So
I'll just jump in a sec to address William's question on the delinquency rate. That the chart, the days is days of the week, so, or days of the month. So it's a declining line on the first of the month. Say approximately a third of the rent was still outstanding. By the 10th of the month, it was maybe 5 or 6% outstanding, and ultimately it's 3%, or a little over 3% today.
Awesome. Thank you for addressing that. What advice do you have for people that are self-managing their units with dealing with these severe delinquency rates?
So one, don't panic. Don't do anything rash. Take a deep breath. Especially early on, there was so much like, oh, you have to do something. You have to contact your lender. Well, I would say, you know, wait and see how this all shakes out. Communicate with residents. If any are having trouble paying, find out what's going on, what their story is. Can they pay part of the rent? You know, can they pay on days when they get their unemployment benefits? Whatever the situation is, but this is a good time to over communicate or communicate frequently with residents that are having a challenging time.
Awesome. So I know that most of your units are in like the B- to A+ categories, and correct me if I'm wrong.
I'd say B- to B+.
B minus
So
yeah.
kind of 60s buildings that are have been renovated and in decent but not really great areas.
Yeah. Do you see a different kind of renter in those buildings? And have they actually taken the whole like PPE program? Um, have they like applied for it? Have you seen that in your buildings?
Uh, so the resident demographic is I would say mid to late 20s, kind of service to early stage professional. So uh, not the Amazon workers of the world. Maybe more like the paralegals and nurses. So what benefits have they taken? PPP is focused on business owners. So there are some businesses and on the commercial front, certainly we're working with a lot of commercial tenants on their PPP loans. But on the residential side, it's mainly unemployment benefits and working through that. And on the chart of delinquency by building class, there's an interesting connection between self-sufficiency and self-reliance and building class. So, people in nicer buildings are more or have been more self-motivated to apply for benefits on their own, and whereas in the lower tier buildings they need more encouragement and guidance and help and have benefited more from the resources that we've provided.
Awesome. Great. So let's hand it over to William now and then come back to Preston with your Q&A at the end of the webinar.
Sounds great.
Thank you, Preston. That was so enlightening. Thank you. Hi, William.
Hi there.
Hi. Take it away.
Okay, let me get my screen share up so everybody can see.
Perfect.
Let me know when the screen share is kicked in. Excellent. As like I said, my name is William Shadbolt, and as you can tell from my accent, I'm not from Seattle. I'm from Vashon Island. Now, usually when I say that in real life, I have a little bit of laughter, but I just can't get that feedback, so that was a bit of a joke. So what I'm going to do for my presentation is looking at what is the data out there and also resources. And these resources are really going to be targeted at the small landlord that is a typical rental housing association of Washington. So a little bit about myself. Let me just try and get this going. Like I said, my name is William Shadbolt. I bought my first rental in 1993, about 20 years before anybody coined the term a house hack, but basically that's what it is. I've served on the board now of the Rental Housing Association for I think about 7 years. I'm currently the PAC chair and the past president. I also serve as a board member of the Housing Connector, and amongst other things, as well as being a licensed real estate broker, I do private money loans as well. So we're going to take a look at what has happened. This is a little bit of background about the Rental Housing Association for people on the line that don't know what RHA is it's been around since the 1930s, and there's about 5,500 small landlords. Typical landlord is mom and pop with 2 rentals. So we're going to look at really 2 different things and then head into a Q&A. The first thing we're going to look at is rent data for April and May of this year from 4 different angles. Then we're going to get into the COVID-19 resources for housing providers and finish up with a Q&A. So what we're going to look at on the rent data for April and May is we're going to look at a data set that is national. It's over 11 million different rental units. Then we're going to look at Washington larger apartment buildings. That this information comes from OneFur, which is kind of the sister organization for RHA, but for large apartment complexes. It's the Washington Multi-Family Housing Association. Then RHA did its own survey of its membership in the start of April and the start of May. And I'm going to talk a little bit about my own experience because I think that's valuable. So let's have a look at national data. So this is from 11.4 million apartment units. Now, some of you may remember that back in April, some quite left of center politicians started talking about how 31% of people couldn't pay the rent in April. They were basically misquoting this data. So what they were looking at was, if you look at this chart on 2020 on the right-hand side, where it has 85%, they were looking at this black line here on the 6th. Well, one issue with this data was that the 6th ended up on, I think it was a Sunday. So people that had paid or dropped off a check on the 5th, it wouldn't get credited until after. So it's better looking at about the 13th, because if they haven't paid by the 13th, you know they're heavily delinquent. So it's worth looking at the differences between 2019 and 2020. So in April, you had a drop of just over 5% in payments. But then when you started looking at May, if you look at this, you've got a 2% drop. So that's narrowed, which is a very good sign. And I think part of that comes down to, by May, a lot of people that had been laid off and furloughed, their unemployment benefits were getting paid. And that was my experience, and I'll come to that in a moment. So this is information. You can actually, anybody can look at this information month by month. It is online. If you jump on that, if you do NMHC rent payment tracker and a Google search, you can find that information. So this is large apartment operators in Washington State. This was a non-payment rate, and it was done at different date points. So the column on the left is March the 30th. And so it's interesting to compare what was the non-payment rate at the start of March, at the end of March versus the end of April. It's really in March, there's very little impact. Very few people have been laid off. And if you actually notice that, that number is actually declined. So more people have been paid on time by the end of April than they did at the end of March. And likewise, if you look at mid-month, where you've got the middle of April versus the middle of May now, that's declined. So these are good indicators that people are being able to pay their rent. So let's take a look at the RHA surveys. So these are typical member of RHA, as I said, has a couple of rental units. There are some larger apartment managers and owners that are in there, which is why when we have this approximate sign in front of the rental units, when people reply to the survey, I'm guessing that 99% of people put in accurate numbers to the rental units when they had, for example, less than 20 rental units. But we had some people that just put in 1,500. Now, the chances are that they didn't have exactly 1,500, which is why those are approximate. But it gives you an idea of the size. You took just under 17,000, just over 13,000 for April and May. So a pretty good sample of surveys. So the number of rental units that reached out by the 1st that they couldn't pay in full. So this number is the percentage of people that are rental units that have reached out to the landlord by the 1st of May saying, I can't pay in full on the 1st. And so it dropped from just under 5% in April to just over 4% in May, which is great. So we're going to come in and look at these 3 charts in more details, but basically partial payments dropped slightly, which is not a particularly good sign, but it could also be a sign that instead of just being partial payments, they were paying in full. The failure to make any payment increase, again, that is a negative sign. That is not good news. The one good bit of news is that landlords are expecting the full payments to get better. So let's take a look at those 3 charts. So this is a comparison. The blue is April data, the rusty red is May. So this is how many renters each landlord had that made a partial payment. So if you look at this in April, these are great numbers here. being this high, it meant that zero landlords that had zero rental units for each individual landlord that responded had a partial payment. Then when you start getting up to 11, this number is skewed by the very, very few members of RHA that have a large number of rental units. It's not good. There's a slight drop. It would be great that it would be higher, this zero number, but it is what it is. So then when we jump to how many renters each landlord had that failed to pay any rent, this is a little bit disturbing. This number increased, actually the opposite. This is actually good news that more landlords had zero decrease failures to pay rent. And again, this number decrease is pretty good as well. So let's look at the last slide. This is really a sentimentality of, do you think the default? So this is very much what the small landlord is thinking. They think 70% in May think it's going to be the same as the month before. But the good news is these two numbers here, significantly more than double think it'll be better in June than it will be in May. And likewise, significantly less in May think it'll be worse. So this is pretty good news on here. So I'm going to talk a little bit now about my own rentals, and I don't have a huge number of them, but one of the things that I really discovered is the requests for help was really split into the people that had W-2 employment and those who are self-employed. So for example, I have a 4-bedroom house in North Seattle, and it's been rented out for just coming up to 10 years to a bunch of 30-somethings, roommate situation, and 3 of the 5 people there got furloughed. And so they requested more time to pay in April. They paid on the 7th instead of the 5th. I was absolutely happy for them to do that. They're great tenants. And they paid on time in May. So what I'm seeing is that people that have been laid off, those unemployment benefits are getting to them, and it's working well. And as Preston mentioned, some people that are in Washington State are actually making more money on unemployment because of the additional $600 a week from the CARES Act. The break point on that is $62,000. So if you have somebody that is a tenant that was making less than $62,000 before and was laid off or furloughed, they're now making more on unemployment. There was a news article about a spa in, I believe it was Woodinville, where they can reopen, and their staff was like, we don't want to come back to work because we're making more money on unemployment. So that's kind of one segment of the resident population that, as long as we have that government safety net, that's not going to continue indefinitely. I suspect there's going to be an extension of that $600 payment, because I believe it expires at the end of July, but don't count on that. Let's look at the flip side of the others. I have a single family rental, and the guy who rents that is a tattoo artist and a musician. His income went to zero overnight. He was unable to pay rent in April or May. The good news about this particular circumstance is I referred him to the Housing Connector Rental Assistance Program, and both April and May's rent was paid for him out of that fund, which most of that was a single donation from a very well-known tech person. And I spoke to the ED of the Housing Connector. $470,000 of rent was paid to landlords in King County in April and May out of that fund. So I'm definitely seeing a difference between that. He has, as a self-employed person, applied for loans, hasn't come through yet. You know, we're just having this conversation. I got an incredibly nice email from him after his April rent was paid, just basically saying he was so grateful for it. So I think one of the opportunities that we have in this is, in some cases, you're going to have better relationships with your tenants after the fact. So we're going to talk a little bit now. We're going to jump from the data to the resources. So the staff of the Rental Housing Association of Washington has put out a huge amount of information for the small landlord and other housing providers. There's operational resources, financial resources, on-demand webinars, and government updates. With one exception, which would be the forms. all of this information is available free of charge to anybody. So I'm going to jump to a browser. So if you go online and go to RHAWA, this is the homepage, and you click on resources, and then you'll see that the very first thing that's down here is COVID-19. If you click on that, you'll bring up this page. Now, when the virus really started to impact, we had a PDF that we were updating literally daily. And we just got to the point where there was too much information to have it in a single PDF. So it's now just basically on the website. So in the operational resources, you've got information on how to work with residents, communication, even things like cleaning. And then under additional resources, you've got some blog posts. There's a great blog post that Adrian Chu wrote for RHA about forbearance and some of the negatives with that. If you have a mortgage that you're interested in asking a lender to go into forbearance, there's some things that you really need to understand before you do that. These forms, that, as I mentioned, are one of the very few things that is behind the paywall. And that includes things like a late payment statement. So this is something that RHA worked out with the Attorney General's office, that you can't give eviction notices, but you can give a statement like that. It specifically says it's not an eviction notice, and they can use that to apply for different assistance programs. So then this next section is the financial resources for housing providers. It talks about the CARE Act, mortgage assistance, the different property tax deferments. So for example, in King County, your property taxes were due at the end of end of April. Now they're not due until the 1st of June. So let's talk about financial resources for renters. We've got information on the federal and state ones here. But for example, if we jump down to King County, it has a list of all the different programs that are offering rental assistance. So what I've done with this is basically taken this information here and given it to those tenants that asked for information. And we are covering Benton, Clark, King, Kitsap, Pierce, Snohomish, Spokane, and Whatcom. So now there's some on-demand webinars that anybody can look at. So for example, if you're interested in the Housing Connector program, the Executive Director, Skelchum, did a webinar that anybody can look at in a more in-depth than what I'm going to do right now, of resources with the Executive Director, Sean Martin of RHA, and Board Member Christopher Cutting. Another one is operating your rentals with Representative Andrew Barkas. So Representative Barkas owns rentals and is a manager. He owns a property management company down in Olympia. And then Government Affairs, which was a board member, Candace Chevalier, Government Affairs Director, Carl Woodring, and Mary Hull Drury, who's the Government Affairs Director for the Realtors, did a Q&A on COVID. Now, if you're interested in finding out the exact details of government proclamations and orders, this is the information section here on it. So you've got federal housing information on foreclosure and eviction moratoriums. You've got the governor moratorium on evictions. This one's the original one. This is the one, the modified order, which is in effect. So one question that keeps on coming out regularly now is, I've got a tenant that's lease is expiring, and for whatever reason, I don't want to renew that. Can I give them notice to say that I'm not renewing it? And the answer is no. Right now, you can't. Best advice that we're receiving from the attorneys is do a 2-month, 3-month short-term extension. So you keep it on a fixed-term lease. Very important to keep them on a fixed-term lease, particularly if they're in the city of Seattle. Now Burien and Federal Way that both have just cause in effect. So then you've got information on the State Supreme Court guidance, information on King County. Interestingly enough, the one thing that a lot of people do not really get is evictions in some cases, in very, very few cases, are going ahead. So it's significant and immediate risk to the health and safety of others. I had a conference call on Saturday, and there was one attorney on there that they did get a court commissioner to issue a writ of restitution against a tenant that was using drugs with children in the property. And I believe it was the wife that was trying to evict her husband out of the rental property. So just to let you know that if there is a immediate and significant risk, health and safety, that is possible. For non-payment or anything else, it is not possible. We should hear later today whether this eviction moratorium from the governor is going to be extended beyond June the 4th. But at this point, it's going to expire on June the 4th. So I'm going to go into the Q&A section, but before I do, if there's anybody on here that is not a member of the Rental Housing Association that wants to join, I'm happy to offer a $50 discount on your first year membership. You just sign up as normal online and you'll get an email welcome you, and then email it to this email address here, which is jeff@rhawa.org, just saying that William Shadbolt authorized a $50 discount, and they'll refund $50 of your membership. So at that point, I am going to throw it back to you, Leka. Do you have some questions for me?
I do, and that was great, and that was a lot of information, but thank you. I hope people, were taking down notes, and if not, just send me an email, and I'm happy to, pass it along to William and Preston too. If you guys want to just type in your email address and how people can get a hold of you in the chat box, that would be great. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of follow-up questions also. William, you can go ahead and stop sharing your screen, and we'll get Preston back on here as well. Perfect. Awesome. Just to kind of throw one question back at you, William, what are you seeing for eviction laws right now? I know when we spoke last week, you said that could go on till March. So can you elaborate a little bit?
Sure. So right now, statewide, there's a eviction moratorium that stays in effect until June the 4th. After that, it depends on whether the governor expands it. As always, you can basically split the state into two. There's the rest of the state of Washington, and then what's the crazy thing that's happening in the city of Seattle. So the city of Seattle, 2 weeks ago, passed an extension for 6 months after the crisis is over, banning evictions. Last week, they passed 2 separate ordinances, one of them which bans the use of eviction records for 6 months. And then the other one is basically you've got to accept a payment plan with no interest, and also banned late fees for 12 months. So you basically got 2 situations: what's going to happen in the rest of the state and what's going to happen in crazy town Seattle. So the 6-month eviction ban, if you think about it, that's not the earliest possible that it can kick in is going to be the start of June. It's probably going to be later than that. But those 6 month ends when the new winter eviction ban, which was passed earlier this year, that stops anybody being evicted pretty much for nearly any reason in December, January, and February. So right now, you can't likely to be evict somebody for non-payment in the city of Seattle and start the process until March. I obviously can't talk about lawsuits, but the rental housing associations being in deep discussions with different attorneys about litigation on this. There's multiple grounds of why it's unconstitutional, both under the federal and the state constitution. And also all 3 ordinances, I'm pretty certain, are going to be ruled that they violated the Open Public Meetings Act. The Attorney General gave the city of Seattle advice that they could only do things that are routine and necessary, like paying bills, or things that were dealing with the outbreak. That was the exact expression. Clearly, something that kicks in after the outbreak isn't dealing with the outbreak.
Wow. Okay, so we have a question here from Andrew Solomon. Do you see variations in non and partial payments by region? That is Pierce versus South King versus Seattle versus Eastside versus Snohomish. He says that he has 3 out of 4 rents in Tacoma and that made their payments, and 8 out of 8 in Kent. So are you seeing differences by neighborhood? I think, Preston, this kind of goes back to the class of building too.
Yeah, I can't speak to outside of King County, all the properties that I manage are in Seattle, but the building quality is very much at play. I see that as a universal trend that would transcend geographic boundaries. So yeah, depending on the quality of building relative to the housing stock in that environment, you're likely going to see different credit quality on the tenants and better credit quality, the better the ability to pay.
I would agree. I think it's more down to, it's a playoff between building quality and the correlation between building quality and the type of tenant that you have in there, versus a geographic distribution. I mean, let's face it, if you have a rental in Aston County and you have somebody there, the rents are going to be less, that $600 additional unemployment, it's going to be easier to cover the rent than if you're got a $2,500 rent in the city of Seattle. I'll give you an example. As we said at the beginning, I have a mobile home park in the state of Iowa. The rents on that are $260 a month, basically for the dirt. They own the structure. $1,200 assistance for the one-off and $600 in unemployment. That's more money than they've seen in a long time, a lot of the people there. And my on-site manager has reported seeing a large uptick in big screen TVs being brought into homes. So I think it's more likely, as Preston said, on the building, which correlates with the sort of tenant that you have rather than geographic constraints.
Got it. We have a question here from Alex, and he says, how do you count doors for properties that are rented out by room, that is like student housing situations, vacation rentals, house hacks, etc.?
Personally, I do it by lease.
Okay.
So if you have a 4-bedroom and you've got 4 separate leases,
that's 4 doors.
That's 4 doors. If you have 4 roommates and they're on a single lease, I'd say argue that it's 1. But it's really up to your individual person and how you want to count that.
Yeah, I was going to say it depends who's asking or who you're responding to, right? If it were a lender that I was talking to, I would be referencing the number of legal units that the King County or that the county tax assessor recognizes, right? And if it's in conversation or at a cocktail party, I would go off of number of leases or number of doors.
Right.
I'd look at it in a different way.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So any other from our participants, like any other questions you want these two to answer today? Just go ahead and type it in the Q&A box. We have just a couple more minutes. And if not, I have a question for the both of you.
And by the way, the Q&A boxes are towards the bottom of the screen. It has participants Q&A chat.
Yes.
Took me a bit of time to figure out when you were talking about Q&A. What's this Q&A thing? Where is it?
I know. But anyway, so I want to thank you both for being here today. It's been amazing having you. I do want to end with one last question. So these are obviously unprecedented times, but what opportunities are you seeing that, people can take advantage of?
I'm going to let Preston answer that first.
Yes, I am salivating. I can't wait to get back into this market, and there will be deals to be had, but not for a while. So in the short term, I think the best thing you can do is nothing, is just to sit and wait and watch it unfold. There is so much more that still needs to play out with this, right? Like the pain isn't going to be felt until these unemployment benefits burn off and we start seeing an impact to rent rolls. And until we see an impact to rent rolls, sellers aren't going to be motivated to reduce their price on their building, right? Like, don't tell me my building's worth less when the rents haven't changed. So from a seller standpoint, interest rates are down. Even if financing's harder, there's not a compelling narrative from a seller's standpoint to part with their building. So, I mean, I look back to the last downturn. The multifamily real estate market put in a bottom about 2 years after the stock market did. So as a rough gauge, a barometer of where we are, that's one useful guidepost that I look to in the past. But there will be some good deals, but not yet.
Wait.
Yes.
Wait on it. What about you, William?
So I think there's 2 points I'm going to make on this. First of all, I think it's a fantastic opportunity for good landlords and good property managers to create much better relationships with their tenants. Take, for example, my tenant that was the tattoo artist and musician. I feel as though we've got a much better relationship now because I've helped him out to pay his rent in April and May. I also think you're going to see an acceleration of the use of technology to deal with things. I was kind of curious on Preston's slide of virtual maintenance calls. I can't remember exactly what the wording was on the slide, but I was sat there thinking, how much money do you save not having somebody drive to a unit? I mean, if I have to do it, which I don't really do that much maintenance these days, I got to drive 20 minutes to a ferry, wait at least 20 minutes for a ferry, take a half an hour ferry ride, and then there's another 30 minutes before I even get to somebody's front door. Whereas being able to turn around and say, hey, let's have a Zoom meeting. You can show me what the problem is. And sometimes it's like, literally, you have ones like, my smoke alarm's broken. And you get out there, it's like, no, it's not broken. It's absolutely fine. You just need to replace the battery. That's your responsibility. So I think you've got that opportunity. I'll give you another example. I had a mobile home where I actually had taken possession of the actual structure and had somebody that wants to buy it. The entire sale, with the exception of registering the title with the Treasurer's office, which you can't do until the Treasurer's office opens, has been done online. The payment's done online. The lease and the park rules are signed online. The purchase agreement was done online. And I think you're seeing that that technology that was already there, the use of it is going to be accelerated. And it was a lot easier than, having the pieces of paper printed out. So I think you're going to see that as a side effect from this, is that increased use of technology to streamline it, which I think is going to be excellent. I did notice we do have another question from Sarah. Both of you are investing in Renton. Is there a pattern or trend you've noticed in this particular area? ? Growth ? I want to make a couple of comments here and give you an idea of the difference between the city of Renton and the city of Seattle. Several years ago, the city of Renton was convinced that they should have a rental inspection program similar to the city of Seattle. I literally spent 3 years working with them to get it to one where it was very similar to the Tacoma model. And so it wasn't mandatory inspections throughout of it. And part of that, I do remember I had a meeting with the mayor. He's now stepped down. Mayor back then was Dennis Law. And at the end of the discussion we had, I said, Dennis, I have rentals in the city of Seattle and I have rentals in Renton. And I drive between the two. And it's just odd that I'm driving around Seattle and I'll see homeless people. I'll see RVs on the side of the street. I'm driving to Renton and I can't remember seeing a single homeless person. And I was just kind of curious as a citizen of why is that? And he turned around and said, it's quite simple. We task our police to talk to anybody that appears to be homeless and connect them with the services. And we enforce our no camping in public laws. So, I was kind of interested in that, but the difference between that city and the city of Seattle, I actually have quite a bit of land in the pocket of Skyway. There's unincorporated King County that both King County wants to get rid of and Renton wants to annex. Unfortunately, there was a vote that voted it down, so it's not likely to be voted on again. So I'm probably going to do a street-by-street annexation to the city of Renton. And they're just so much easier to deal with. Literally, the senior planner, I can pick up the phone and talk to her and ask her a question. Try doing that in the city of Seattle.
A much smaller city. Like when I flip a home in Renton, it takes me like 3 months versus Seattle that could take me 8 months.
Yeah. Exactly. So you have that difference in the smaller jurisdictions that they're not antagonistic. I mean, Preston turned around and said that is 99.9% of the relationships between landlord and tenant are not the ones that Swan talks about, of the evil landlord and the poor tenant being downtrodden. 99% of them are relationships similar to a good friend of mine. He's an attorney, actually. He would have his tenant, his landlord would come over to fix something, and they'd have a plate of spaghetti together. The problem with what Seattle's doing is it's driving out those mom and pop landlords, which does a couple of things. And it's been documented. The city of Seattle commissioned a study with the University of Washington, and it came back with 40% of landlords have either sold their rentals in the city of Seattle or were planning to sell them. So what happens when the mom and pop landlord sells a single family home is it invariably goes back to owner occupied. It's just not worth buying a single family home in the city of Seattle to rent it out. You get like a 2 or 3% cap rate.
Right.
Then when you look at the duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, those smaller units, you have to just drive places where they have a lot of those, like Fauntleroy Way in West Seattle, and you see the number that are being torn down and townhomes built. And it makes logical sense that you could buy for example, like $1 million for a fourplex, tear it down and put 4 townhomes that you sell for 600, 700, 800, even over $1 million. So there's best use of land there. When you look at the small apartment buildings that stay existing, a classic example was there's a member on the RHAWA board, Cece. She managed 2 apartment buildings. Her family had owned one for 50 years, one for 60 years. Neither of them had debt, incredibly affordable rents. She gave me the rent roll from before they sold them. They both were sold because of the Seattle ordinances. And it wasn't just what's passed, it's what's the next crazy thing.
Exactly.
So I kept track every time a rental unit in those buildings have come up, and their rents have basically doubled. And part of that is one of them, I think, has a $4.5 million loan on it, and the other has an $8 million loan. So they have to service that debt, those higher rents. Admittedly, they had remodeled them. Every time somebody moved out, they'd go in, remodel them, so they were nicer. But that's what's impacting a lot of rents in the city of Seattle. If you want to keep organically affordable rent, you want to do everything possible to keep the mom and pop landlord that have owned their property for a long time rather than sell them. And I'm kind of in that position. I'm beginning to sell off my Seattle rentals and just do 1031 exchanges outside of the city, because it's just like, what's the next crazy thing? I think credit scores. I think they'll consider banning the use of credit scores. At what point do I not have any say over who's going to rent? Right. With first in time, you can't look at criminal records, although that's still being litigated. They now just ban the use of eviction records partially. What's left there?
Yeah.
So anyway, longer response than I thought I was going to, but Sarah, that's my answer. Better city to deal with. And
Preston doesn't own any property in Renton, I don't think, right?
No, I don't own anything in Renton, but having grown up in Seattle and watched Renton all my life, I love the economic progress that the city's made. It's a city kind of in the path of progress as kind of a first ring from Seattle City. I love the development that's happened. It feels like an up and coming city of its own. I love what they're doing with the waterfront. My concern, as the economic base has grown and diversified, Boeing still has a huge presence there, and that could be a headwind with future layoffs and future challenges that Boeing has.
Preston, you just said something that rings so true with me, which is get in the way of development or expansion. I had a very dear friend. He and his wife donated the money to a scholarship fund, and I was the second person to win it. He passed away, unfortunately, in 2000, and he owned a lot of woodland, and he didn't deliberately go and buy woodland as a way of then selling it to a builder. But I remember Lee turning around and saying, he bought a parcel of woodland in the southeast of England, and less than a year later, a developer had offered him more than £1 million more than what he paid for it. And it was the easiest £1 million I have ever made. And, it was just like, it was just in the way of development. And that's the one thing about the Puget Sound. If you think about it, you can't go east and west because of the Cascades and the Sound. So you only can go north and south. So, you know, that's where Renton is, that expansion from the Seattle, it's in the way of that. And that's why, you know, for appreciation, I still think the Puget Sound area has got a long way to go.
Yeah. Well, I think that was all. We are recording this webinar. It will be available shortly. Nee's going to send it out. So watch out for that and make sure to share it with your friends. Very, very informative information thrown out from both William and Preston today. Thank you guys for attending. We are a few minutes past our time. Hope to see you at the next one. We should have our next webinar scheduled in a couple of weeks. So see you back then.
All right. Thanks,
Thank you.
Leka.
Bye.
Great job.
Thank you. Bye.